Hello and welcome to today's Partner Infopedia web conference. This is the sixth of the Windows 10 Learning Series, Windows 10 Management. Presenting for us today, please welcome Senior Product Marketing Manager, Michael Niehaus. Michael, you now have the floor.
Thank you. So this morning we want to talk about what's changed in Windows 10 for Business, specifically around the management functionality that's included in Windows 10. Just to kind of set some background for that, we almost need to go back to the start when Windows started adding management functionality that businesses had requested. We really can go back all the way to like Windows 3.11, Windows for Workgroups, where we started adding these types of management features, and we've continued adding those over the years to the point where we think that we now have pretty much all the functionality that businesses need. The challenge, though, is that there are constantly changing needs for businesses. So as part of this evolution, we need to add some new management choices to meet those needs. So we're not planning to take away anything from Windows. What we're really looking at is trying to provide some new capabilities to address new scenarios for using Windows devices. What you used to see being a typical Windows device is something that's used in the office 9 to 5, connected to a LAN, fully corporate managed with all of the standard controls that we've grown used to with Active Directory and Group Policy, System Center, and all these other components working together to manage the device. But as we shift into this more mobile first, device first view of the world with more tablets and phones and other BYOD type devices into the mix, we've now gotten into a situation where we need some other management capabilities to address a type of device that typically isn't connected to the corporate network, maybe isn't even owned by the organization, and really has a completely different life cycle. So how do we address these new requirements that are coming forward with the new Windows 10 release? So the big focus for us then is providing those additional management choices, making sure that Windows 10 can first be used in the traditional way that it's used today, where you can just drop it into your existing infrastructure and manage the Windows 10 device using Active Directory, Group Policy, and System Center. So that's a number one goal. But then at the same time, we want to expand our MDM support so that we can have cloud managed devices that are consistent across PC and phone. So we'll have the same MDM agent in both PC and phone operating systems, which will support not only our own Microsoft Intune solution, but also third-party MDM solutions like AirWatch, Mobile Iron, and any of the other MDM services out there that add the support for managing Windows 10. We started with mobile device management capabilities in Windows 8.1, providing really the basic settings for managing BYOD devices. For Windows 10, we want to expand that to provide more capabilities for that corporate-owned device that's being managed from the cloud. So when we look at the types of choices that we have, it's not just about the management tools themselves. It's also about some other pieces around that, like identity. We've had Active Directory for quite a few years, and most organizations are using that for identity within their organizations. But as we move into a cloud-based world, we need to extend the directory to the cloud as well. So Azure Active Directory is our solution for doing that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, how the two of them work together for most organizations to allow Active Directory for the traditional on-prem usage, synchronized with Azure Active Directory for cloud-based services. We've already talked a little bit about the management side, where we have Group Policy, Configuration Manager, and tools like that for the traditionally managed corporate PC. But then For the cloud-based ones, we're using services like Intune or other third-party MDMs. With Windows on-prem, we've generally used Windows Server Update Services, WSUS, to provide updates to those machines, giving organizations control over the Windows updates as they are released to make sure that they can test them, approve them, and push them out to machines in their organization. We'll extend that with Windows 10 to provide similar functionality via MDM as well. So even if you're having a cloud-managed machine through Intune or another service, you would get control over Windows updates by approving them via the service that's running from the cloud. So really providing the same type of functionality that we have with WSUS, but leveraging MDM protocols to do that. The infrastructure side of things, really, if you're talking about on-prem and traditional management, you're already running that on your existing corporate networks, but for the MDM-based services, obviously those are running in the cloud. We need to make sure that we can support any ownership model. For corporate-owned devices, that's the traditional mechanism that most organizations are already used to. For BYOD, the focus is a little different. It's about providing an appropriate set of management support for the device that allows an organization to configure security policy on the device, to push applications to the device, to be able to wipe business data off of the device, but not really take over the device because it still belongs to the person. They have to use that for their own personal uses as well. So really trying to provide that balance between what the organization wants and what the user expects, since it is their own device. Sitting in between the two is a scenario that's been growing in popularity, where an organization allows the employee to choose their own device. So rather than the organization providing maybe a list of 3 or 5 different models of machines to choose from, instead they just provide each person a budget to get whatever machine they want themselves. In that type of an environment, the traditional configuration and management approach that's used for the typical corporate-owned PC might not work quite so well. So we're trying to provide additional capabilities to allow you to transform a device from its initial configuration into a enterprise device without having to use more of the traditional wipe and load deployment techniques for that. So really we expect to tie all of these together in different combinations, in different scenarios, so that you can apply the appropriate scenario to a group of machines. The idea isn't that we use the exact same set of management technologies for every machine in an organization. It's that we want to be able to choose the appropriate model for any particular type of device. These management choice scenarios can be grouped into 3 basic models, ranging from basic, where we're just using Exchange ActiveSync to allow access to email and Windows Update to push out updates to the devices. That's traditionally a BYOD scenario where you just have these lightweight email access requirements. We can then move up to a mobile device management based scenario where we're using either Active Directory or Azure Active Directory for identity, mobile device management, an MDM service to provide manageability, Windows Update, which we can now control via MDM to push out updates to ensure that the device remains secure, and that targets both BYOD devices and company-owned devices. That's really the big shift from Windows 8.1, where we targeted primarily BYOD. With Windows 10, we want to expand that to also include company-owned devices. Finally, we had the full control scenario, which is what most organizations are using today, with Active Directory providing identity, Group Policy, providing settings management on those devices, and then System Center Configuration Manager, providing software distribution and additional capabilities on top of that. That typically leverages WSUS, Windows Server Update Services, for controlling patches. That will continue to be supported with Windows 10, and really this overall is targeting those company-owned devices that most people are familiar with today. If we look at the entire suite of Windows management features, we've got a variety of components in the client operating system itself. These features like WMI, Windows Update, Group Policy, MDM, PowerShell, all of these get enhanced in Windows 10. Some new incremental functionality coming for each one of those. Then we typically tie in server components with Active Directory, Group Policy, and WSUS. Those services are going to continue to be supplied by Windows Server 2012 or 2012 R2, even back to earlier releases. So Windows 10 will be fully compatible with existing Windows Server releases. We can then layer on top of that System Center Configuration Manager and the Desktop Optimization Pack, the MDOP tools like application virtualization, user experience virtualization, Dart, MBAM, and tools like that to provide further manageability for the Windows devices. What really gets a lot more attention in Windows 10 are the cloud services. So Azure Active Directory is something that's existed for a while, but the Windows Client OS really had no knowledge of Azure Active Directory. So if a client wanted to access a cloud service like Intune or Office 365 or any other Azure AD-based service, you could use it, but anytime you would access it, you would have to put in your ID and password again. With Windows 10 fully understanding the relationship between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, you get single sign-on capabilities between the two. Even for the traditional organization that's still using AD for all of their on-prem resources, you still get single sign-on to these cloud-based services because Windows has this understanding of the tie between an AD account and an Azure Active Directory account. We also have capabilities provided through Azure Rights Management Services for controlling access to company data, our own Intune MDM service, enhancements to the Windows Store to provide new business store functionality, which we'll talk about in a later webcast, and the Windows Update services as well, which feeds the updates into MDM, into WSUS, and down to the client machines. So we're working on all of those. We want to make sure that we have compatibility, first of all. So it's worth talking a little bit about what happens when you drop Windows 10 into existing infrastructure. From a System Center perspective, if you're running System Center 2012 R2 or System Center 2012 Configuration Manager, both will support Windows 10 management as well as Windows 10 deployment. In order to provide that support, we will be releasing a service pack for both of those versions. So probably in the next couple of weeks, you'll see previews for those service packs to show you the additional functionality, the additional capabilities for managing and deploying Windows 10 with those releases. So that would be the releases that we would ask most customers to use. For those that are still back on Configuration Manager 2007, it can manage Windows 10 devices. It won't be able to deploy them. So we'll probably release a hotfix for Configuration Manager 2007 to add Windows 10 support, primarily adding it as a supported platform and addressing any compatibility issues that we find, which we don't expect to find. But we won't provide support for Windows 10 deployment in Config Manager 2007, just like it doesn't support deploying Windows 8.1 today either. So that version is pretty much stabilized. We want people to move forward to the more recent releases, and there'll also be a new release, just call it Config Manager V Next at this point, which we'll be talking about more in the next couple of weeks as well, so stay tuned for that. So Configuration Manager fully supports Windows 10. Most people will need to install a service pack to get Windows 10 support or move to the new release once it comes out. On the Windows Server side, any supported Windows Server release will be fully supported for Windows 10 as well. So no big upgrades needed for the Windows Server infrastructure. Existing versions of Active Directory, existing schemas should work just fine for Windows 10, although there may be some specific features that require specific schema extensions or Active Directory versions. So we'll have more details to publish on those as the features and functions finalize themselves. But at this point, for the core functionality provided in Windows 10, supporting that with existing Active Directory and Windows Server versions will be just fine. For the for activation, which is another related technology as well, the existing Windows Server releases will also have hotfixes to enable KMS activation for Windows 10 devices. So expect there to be a hotfix for that and some new product keys that go along with that. But it's the similar type of process that we've gone through for Windows 8 and Windows 8.1, where we just enable the new keys using a hotfix added to existing KMS servers. Another tool that we have that's more focused on Windows deployment rather than management is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. There will be an updated version of that, MDT 2013 Update 1. The preview of that is already available. It will support deploying Windows 10 as well as supporting deployment of Windows 7, 8, and 8.1. So that's really the goal, is to enable management and deployment of Windows 10 with current releases with some updates applied to them, while at the same time making sure that all of these releases can continue to support Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 8.1, because we don't want to get into a situation where the prevalent operating systems that are being used by our customers require different versions of tools in order to support them. So everything will be supported by the latest updates to all of these different products. So let's talk a little bit more about mobile device management. If we look at Windows 8.1 on the desktop, we had some basic MDM capabilities to address BYOD scenarios. If we look at the phone device, Windows Phone 8.1, we had some additional capabilities for device lockdown. But we still really didn't get to a point where we thought that the MDM capabilities could provide the type of functionality that most organizations would expect for a fully managed corporate device. With Windows 10, both on the desktop and on the phone, we think we'll get there. We'll add additional capabilities. That doesn't mean, though, that we're going to completely recreate group policy and configuration manager and WSUS and everything else on top of an MDM-based protocol. Instead, what we'll focus on are providing the key management features from group policy, from config manager, from WSUS in an MDM space. As an example, we've got 3,600 group policy settings today. If we even attempted to provide 3,600 MDM settings, all we would really end up achieving is making MDM way too complex. So what we're hoping to do is provide fewer configuration settings at a higher level, but still providing you the types of controls that you want for that corporate managed device. It's a tricky balancing act. We may not get it 100% right with the first Windows 10 release. You may find that there are some settings missing if you look at that even in the current preview releases. But what we're looking for is feedback from customers to figure out what's missing, because out of those 3,600 settings, we really have no solid information on whether some of them are even used. So getting feedback from insiders and then from corporate adoptions will allow us to continue to enhance this capability to provide anything that's missing as we go down the line. So MDM in Windows 10 is built in. It has a set of capabilities that will be consistent across mobile devices, phones, desktops, tablets, even Internet of Things and embedded type systems will all have the same MDM agent built into the operating system and a lot of the same capabilities. Now, there will be some variation as we go to each of the different platforms, since the platforms have different capabilities. But you will see a consistent implementation across all of them. So once an MDM service adds support for one, effectively they've added support for all of them. They're all using the same protocols, same enrollments, same authentication, and in a lot of cases the exact same settings. When we look at the types of functionality that we want to add in Windows 10, it really addresses all parts of the MDM lifecycle, from enrollment all the way through the unenrollment of the device. On the enrollment side, what we're trying to do is making it simpler to enroll a device through bulk enrollment, which is great for corporate-owned devices when you're buying them hundreds or thousands at a time. We want to provide Azure AD integration so that if you've got a machine that you want to join into Azure AD, we can automatically enroll the device in an MDM service at the same time. So basically, we configure in Azure AD, here is the MDM service that we want to use, and the Azure AD join process will automatically complete that enrollment as part of the initial Azure AD join setup. We'll also be able to apply provisioning packages to the device where we pre-configure the MDM enrollment details in those provisioning packages to make it that much easier for a user or even an IT technician to enroll a device in MDM. Just copy this file to the device, double-click it, and it will take care of the rest of the configuration for you. So a variety of scenarios around that to make enrollment simpler. We'll also extend the device inventory, as there are a variety of requests that we've gotten from users and operators and IT groups who want additional inventory information. So we're adding a variety of settings there. We're adding new policies and new capabilities around certificate management to provide more flexibility there. Settings to allow you to configure Wi-Fi, VPN, email accounts, to provide that device update control, the WSUS type functionality that I mentioned before, and also the device lockdown type capabilities to enable you to configure a device as a kiosk, to configure the start screen and start menu, and really to turn a device into what could be considered more of a single purpose device. Make this device run this application at the time that it starts up, and don't allow the user to make any changes to that. For application management, we'll provide a mechanism to allow an organization to use a new capability that we call the business store to acquire applications and application licenses. We'll integrate that via MDM to allow an MDM service to deploy an app that's been acquired through the business store. So you use the business store to get the licenses, MDM to push them out to the devices. You'll also be able to use MDM to build your own curated store, so basically your own private store, and let MDM handle the pushing of the application, either doing that itself through side loading or also leveraging the business store and Windows Store infrastructure to have the apps pushed out like that. We're going to do some simplification on the line of business app management, specifically around side loading, to provide consistent behaviors between Windows Phone and desktop. we'll move away from the sideload product keys that we've had in the past and move to more of a policy-based control where you check a box to enable the device for running line of business applications. We'll extend the application inventory to provide information on line of business and store apps that have been pushed out via MDM. We'll add more support for allow and deny lists by building in app locker functionality and be able to control that via MDM. And we'll add support for new Windows 10 features like enterprise data protection so that you can configure those via MDM to really make it simple to implement these new Windows 10 capabilities. For remote assistance, we've had the ability to do a device wipe with the Windows Phone since it was released. But for the desktop devices, we could do remote business data removal, but we couldn't do a full device wipe. With Windows 10, we'll add that so that regardless of whether you're using desktop or mobile, you'll be able to reset the device. We'll also be able to do the same types of functionality that we have for locking a machine, trying to locate a machine. So those types of features will be built in as well. On the unenrollment side, we'll make sure that we can complete unenrollment requests regardless of the state of the machine. Some of the limitations that we've had with previous releases that we could only complete unenrollment if the user was actually logged onto the device. So we'll take care of those restrictions and at the same time make sure that we can remove enterprise data, apps, certificates, profiles, policies, encrypted data of any kind anytime we want to wipe that device. So really being able to revoke and remove all the MDM configurations is a key goal for Windows 10. So let's talk a little bit more about identity then. So Azure Active Directory, as we mentioned before, provides key identity and security capabilities for most organizations. Azure Active Directory takes this to the cloud. We don't really expect anyone to just overnight decide to flip from one to the other. What you would typically do instead is use them both together and potentially use different ones for different groups of machines. Remember, we're talking about identity choices, so you can pick and choose. To support that, we would typically set up synchronization between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. But when we have that in place, then we can have a few different scenarios. So if we look at organization-owned machines, we can join a machine into Active Directory, which establishes a level of trust between that computer and AD. The user can then sign on to the machine using an Active Directory account. They get management features via Group Policy and System Center, and they get single sign-on then to cloud-based services because of the link between Active Directory and Azure AD. If you take a machine instead and join it into Azure AD, which is a new capability in Windows 10, it establishes the trust between Azure AD and the device. The user can then sign in directly using their Azure AD credentials. In this case, we're not providing group policy from the cloud, so management comes from Intune or another third-party MDM service. We will eventually provide settings roaming through Azure AD as well. Like today, when you attach a Microsoft account to an Active Directory account, your settings roam to that Microsoft account. Well, organizations don't really want to use Microsoft accounts for settings related to enterprise devices. But once we can get that support added for Azure AD, which won't be ready for Windows 10 RTM, but will be ready with a future update after that, then that enables an Azure AD account to be leveraged the same way that an MSA is used today, with settings roaming to the cloud automatically. But even that Azure AD machine, where the user is signed into the machine using an Azure AD account, they would be able to access on-prem resources as well. So even though it's an Azure AD joined device, they still can access Active Directory-based resources. Again, because there's a relationship between the two, and the on-prem servers and services know about that relationship and can easily authenticate an Azure AD user against an on-prem machine. So plenty of organizationally owned scenarios there. On the personally owned side for BYOD, we used to have a scenario that was called Workplace Join, which was a thoroughly confusing name because when we get into these other workplace scenarios with Azure AD, it was kind of ambiguous as to what that meant. So we've actually renamed that with Windows 10 to call it device registration. So you can register a personally owned device with Active Directory or Azure Active Directory to establish a certain level of trust of that device, even though it's a personal device, so that you can then do conditional access of remote resources, either in the cloud or on-prem, to say that even this person may have access to a corporate resource, but I only want to allow access to that resource if they're accessing it from a trusted device, a registered device. So it's really providing an additional level of validation that if somehow the user's user ID and password is compromised, maybe they wrote it on a piece of paper and someone found the piece of paper, that by itself isn't enough to get access to corporate resources, because they would still need access to the person's device in order to have that type of access. These personally owned devices would then be managed using Intune or some other MDM service. A user would typically sign in to that personally owned device using a Microsoft account, but then they would be able to add a work account to that. So that gives them the same single sign-on capabilities that you would have with an Active Directory sign-on, but it just gets it so that you don't need to be typing in your corporate ID and password all the time. Once you've added that work account, we can use that to provide transparent single sign-on access to cloud-based services. So let's look a little bit more at Azure Active Directory. For those that haven't yet looked at the architecture that we have in place, we first start off with Active Directory running on-prem and a variety of Azure-based services running in the cloud, with Azure Active Directory sitting in between. So first we need to establish a connection between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, which uses a free tool that we have available for download. Once that's configured, it sets up synchronization between Active Directory and Azure AD so that you can then get single sign-on to all of these different cloud-based services. Fairly easy to set up. It requires installing the AAD connector on one device inside of the organization and walking through a wizard to configure it, where you put in credentials for the on-prem AD, the cloud-based Azure Active Directory tenant, and a few other simple configuration options, and everything is set to then do the synchronization. You get additional capabilities that can be added on top of Azure Active Directory, like self-service, group management, password reset, things like that. Some of these capabilities are provided through additional levels of Azure AD support. The most basic versions of Azure Active Directory are free, as long as you have less than a few 100,000 clients and aren't looking for any more advanced capabilities. The free version of Azure AD will work just fine. When we talk about managing devices using MDM, what most organizations run into today is that they then have to do things twice. So let's say you've got a population of machines that are on-prem, corporate owned. You're managing those using System Center Configuration Manager. If you then add a population of machines or even phones that are being managed using an MDM service, you may have to repeat the application distribution and policy definition and all of the other settings that need to be pushed out to the device. So what we've been working toward with Configuration Manager and Intune is to be able to link those two together so that we can have cloud-based management for some machines, on-prem management for other machines, but link them together so that we can do all of the administration together. And taking it even further, we can make sure that we're never doing anything twice, that we can just configure a setting or set up an application through a single admin console and have that configuration then be pushed out to both populations of clients. So that's really the goal with Intune and Configuration Manager working together, providing that single pane of glass for managing all your devices from one console to make the IT administrator's job easier. Of course, that also allows you to add in support for iOS and Android and other devices as well, using the same infrastructure that you're using for your Windows PCs to also manage the non-Windows devices too. So let's talk a little bit more about group policy, which has a few new features in Windows 10. We'll add support for configuring the start screen and start menu, for configuring Project Spartan with a basic set of configuration options, nothing nearly as complex as the 1600 Internet Explorer settings that we provided in the past. We'll add support for next generation credentials, universal application management, so really exposing the key Windows 10 functionality through group policy controls. Since most of our customers, though, are coming from Windows 7, what you'll also see are enhancements that were introduced in Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. So you haven't yet experienced these if you're still running Windows 7. So Windows 10 picks up all of those pieces as well, such as improved policy caching. We've set it up so that when a device logs in, it will use a cached local copy of group policies rather than waiting for those policies to be copied from a domain controller. That gives it a much better initial login time. We've added IPv6 support for printers, for VPN, for targeting devices. We've optimized the sign-in process for direct access so that it understands that a direct access connected device isn't connected across a fast network, even if it sees a fast local network segment. We've added support for larger registry policies to make that process more efficient. We've added support for initiating group policy refreshes remotely through PowerShell or WMI or GP Update or other tools like that. And we've increased the overall efficiency of the background processing that group policy does so that it has less of an impact on the machine overall. So all of those capabilities are built into Windows 10, some carried forward from previous releases, others new for Windows 10. With the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack, MDOP, we'll have full support for Windows 10 when it's generally available this summer. There will be updates for AppV, UEV, MBAM, Dart, all the different tools, but none of these updates are actually required to support Windows 10. We believe that the existing releases will be fully compatible with Windows 10. We could still find some minor issues here and there that might require a hot fix to one or more of these, but at present we expect the existing AppV and UEV, the supported releases that we have out there, to be fully compatible with Windows 10. So we will have new service packs for these available probably within a month or two of the Windows 10 general availability, but don't consider those to be required for Windows 10. They're just our normal maintenance cycle with MDOP to provide updates shortly after each Windows release. The only exception to that would be Dart. Dart is very much tied to each version of Windows. So there will be a new release of Dart that adds recovery and diagnostic capabilities to Windows PE. That will be there will be a new version of that for Windows 10 that specifically supports the Windows 10 version of Windows PE. So then really to get ready for Windows 10 and to get ready for some of these mobile device management capabilities that we're releasing, we would suggest that most organizations start looking at Azure Active Directory. For those that are already using Intune or Office 365 or really anything in Azure, they may already have Azure Active Directory set up with synchronization in place between their on-prem Active Directory environment. If so, great, they're ready to go. For those that don't, well, now would be a good time to start looking at that in advance of the Windows 10 release so that you understand the capabilities, understand the options that you have for setting up the synchronization, and really get that in place prior to Windows 10. For customers that aren't yet running the current releases of Configuration Manager and Windows Server, we would suggest that you move forward to the most recent releases for those. We will have support for older versions, but the older it gets, the less capabilities that would be there. So getting to the current releases of Configuration Manager and Windows Server will provide you with the most functionality. You need to think overall about scenario-based management. Maybe you can use mobile device management for some groups of machines and traditional Active Directory group policy configuration manager for other groups. So looking at devices in that manner, maybe you want to be able to pick and choose between different scenarios. So that's the overview. Now, as far as the specifics and the implementation and the details of what we're providing in Windows 10, we will have some of this functionality coming out with the current flights and future flights as we get closer to the Windows 10 release. So some of that you can try out today, others will take a little bit. It will also require adjustments by the MDM vendors, the MDM services, to provide support for the new settings that we'll be introducing as well. So there may be a little bit of a lag before that support gets added in, but certainly try it out with the current preview releases, provide feedback through the Windows feedback mechanisms, user voice, the Windows feedback app, and mechanisms like that, and be ready for Windows 10 when it releases. So with that, let's wrap it up.
This concludes the audio portion of today's Partner Infopedia web conference. Once again, recording from today's presentation will be available to Microsoft employees on Infopedia, and to our partners, you may access the recording on the Partner Learning Center, all within approximately 48 hours. A huge thank you to our presenter, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.